What is up, guys? Why would you ever listen to this ridiculous meathead? Look at all this meat. Look how big his head is. Why would you listen to this guy? I'm sure his head is full of meat. Well, I'm gonna tell you why you should listen to this guy. I'm gonna start off right and get to the point where I personally think of everyone that's out there on the internet putting out content on social media, YouTube, most people that are searching and looking for the answers. How do I get big? How do I get huge? And just consuming hours and hours and hours of information would probably be better off starting listening to Jordan Peters even before they come to someone like myself, perceivably a nerd. And I'm gonna clarify why. So first and foremost, if you guys are here for some trash talk, go follow some kids that have no manners. I'm a grown man and I don't trash talk other men that I haven't spoken with, met with, worked out with at length. And so for you guys new here, I know Jordan Peters very, very well. We've trained in person. I believe the last time we trained, we both deadlifted. I think I deadlifted 6 plates for my top set. He deadlifted 7. That's the last time I've been within 1 plate of Jordan on pretty much anything. Right now, I'd have to do the pink dumbbells while he's still a man. But on top of that, we have spoken many, many times. We actually probably have WhatsApp conversations that if we took the audio and we took the what we've written back and forth and turned it into some sort of ebook we could sell for a large amount of money. So I love Jordan Peters because from someone that's coming from the outside, may seem that we are at odds, but in a lot of ways we are actually similar, where I consider both of us kind of some balancing meatheads slash nerds. Clearly, if we're gonna tip the scales one way or the other, especially where I'm at now, I'm more on the nerd side and he's maybe more on the meathead side. And so I think in reality, lots of the conversations we've had, we balance each other out well. And from the outside viewer, balance is something that the world needs right now. So the reason that I say Jordan Peters is someone that the average person could watch. Now again, that's not every single person watching this. Some of you guys probably actually just love training, love working really hard, and can consume some nerve information and just seamlessly integrate it with your great adherence, your great work ethic. But tons of people out there now are they just like consume stuff for hours and hours and hours. Lots of inaction, lots of over-analysis. And so Jordan Peters, despite being very smart, despite being a nerd and wanting to look at how he can get better, has so much of the base stuff around training nailed right that so many other people, so many nerds particularly could work on, that I think he's a great person to look at. So what am I gonna do today? I'm gonna go through, these are the key points. So if you wanna skip around, some of these aren't interesting. I'm gonna tell you a little bit ahead of time what we're gonna look at. First and foremost, we're gonna talk about some mindset type stuff, just your view on training, your approach to training. And again, if I mess something up, it's like we're not best friends. We don't hold hands every single day. I'm not reading his mind. I don't have everything verbatim. So Jordan, if I mess something up or misquote you, get down in the comments and call me some ridiculous British slang. That's the other thing. The UK, man, they're just on another level over there with slang. He's gonna call me a knob or something like that, or a wanker, or I don't know, something else. But we just can't compete with the slang that they've got going over there. So we're gonna talk about some mindset. When I say nuts and bolts, we're actually gonna talk about some of the actual kind of on paper stuff with training. I'm gonna do a little bit of movement analysis, not gonna go super, super deep. In reality, like the subtle stuff where maybe Jordan could, and like everyone could improve the teeniest bit in training, we probably actually already talked about it. So there was a long period of time where Jordan and I have consulted each other for advice for long periods of time, probably spanning back, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years. And there were times we were having conversations all the time where I'd give him some feedback and he'd maybe say, maybe I'll try that, then come back later and tell me that it's stupid and it didn't work or something seemed helpful. So anyway, the very nitpicky stuff that might benefit him, I'm not gonna get into too much here. I'm just gonna go into most of the stuff that he does really well that you guys could benefit from. And then I'm gonna talk about also that you're not Jordan. So just like when I review Ronnie Coleman or Jay Cutler, I'm not saying, and Jordan will be the first to say this, you should emulate every single thing he does and expect to look like him, because you won't, because you're not him for a whole bunch of reasons. Aside from drugs, everyone's gonna say, why are we even talking about this? Drugs, drugs, drugs. Go talk to Jordan about drugs. If you wanna learn all the drugs he's ever taken and everything about him, go to his website, pay for it, because there's no mystery or secret about it. Everything I'm gonna tell you though is just as beneficial for you, and honestly maybe more so because he already knows all this, whether you do or do not do drugs ever. If you don't do drugs, you'll just be a smaller version, but bigger than you are right now and better than you are right now. It just won't happen as fast and you won't get quite as far. So there's the PED conversation. Get down in there and tell me how all this is irrelevant later on. People that will never be big for other reasons. So mindset. The thing about Jordan, and from knowing his story a little bit, is he's a guy of action. And honestly, I'm gonna kind of, because the only other person I know better than Jordan really as far as training is myself, I'm gonna compare a little bit as we go along here. It seems like so many people that are successful at improving their physique act first and think later. Now, again, there's always some balance here. I look back at some of the stupid stuff that I did. Most of the stupid stuff I look back on fondly. Most of the stupid stuff I look back on didn't really set me back. I just went in and I got to work. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't maybe analyze for like 16 hours before I actually figured out what the perfect split was. I did, of course, read some stuff. What was Arnold doing is kind of how I got started. And again, just because it wasn't off the rails with stuff, I grew some muscle. And then as I was growing, as I was doing, as I was passionate, obsessed, then I started to think a little bit. And sometimes, again, there's nothing wrong with thinking a little bit, which we'll talk about. But I really think action is the missing piece for a lot of people right now. Most people, if they just got to work, worked hard, and adhered to it for a long period of time, and never turned on social media, depending on the type of person, might be better off than what's the thing now where everyone asks permission to everything. You literally have to ask your influencer, hey, I'm doing arms today, I'm doing unilateral work. Is it okay for me to wipe my ass with just my left hand before I poop, before I do curls? Or should I do both hands? Am I gonna have some different motor recruitment? Is there too much fatigue from that? Someone's asked that question in all seriousness, I'm sure. Some of the questions are just go in, get to work, and then again, you can analyze some stuff later. And this is where we'll have a nice balance we'll talk about between action and passion. Like I said, one of the biggest things that actually I think about why it pisses me off so much, and this just isn't the nerds, this is also the meatheads. If I look back on my career, and not just professionally as a trainer or coach, but look out on my lifting career, which spans over 25 years now, I loved it, all of it. I loved it when I was a pure meathead. I loved it when I've gone to I paid so much money to go learn and literally nerd out about, equipment analysis, exercise analysis, all of it. And I've loved every single second of it. So right now, if you're following someone that pisses you off, I've had people complain to me and say, the nerds are ruining it. I can't even go into the gym and have fun anymore because I'm thinking I'm gonna do this wrong, I'm not optimal. They're not ruining it, you're allowing it to ruin it for you. If a nerd pisses you off and you don't like their stuff and it's ruining the gym for you, stop following them. At the same time, some meathead's gonna make fun of you because you're doing a single arm cable pull down because you don't feel like doing a single arm hammer strength pull down because it works better for you and that's upsetting you. Ignore them. Do whatever the hell you wanna do in the gym and enjoy it. So if you're a nerd, if you're a pure meathead, or if you're some hybrid combination of both, enjoy it. Have passion for it. If I look back, the only thing that I would regret is if I ever let someone else take away my enjoyment from everything that I love doing in the gym. So whatever you love, lean into that, own it. And Jordan does that, and this ties right in with self-awareness. Jordan loves everything that he does. He loves being a stereotypical cliche meathead and doing some stupid meathead stuff. He also likes sometimes thinking and doing things that fit better for him. And that is, he's self-aware. So all you guys out there could do with a little bit more action, a little bit more passion, and just trying to be self-aware of where that may or may not produce some shortcomings in the chase for being optimal. And again, the term optimal, which is actually something that really kind of came into the industry from Tom Purvis and people have beat up and ruined, is not a bad thing. Optimal just means, hey, if I can do a curl and both of them get me big biceps, but one of them ruins my elbows, which one's more optimal? And that's a simple example that leads up to everything. Should I eat 50 grams of protein a day or 200 grams of protein a day if I'm a 200-pound male trying to get bigger? One of those is more optimal. So the word's not bad. Everyone should try and be doing things better, but just be self-aware of where your limitations may be. I've seen Jordan say, this is kind of dumb, but I enjoy the dumb, and here's some of the problems that may happen from it. That's what it's all about. Self-awareness, managing expectations. Everybody should do a little bit more of that. So act, enjoy it, and be aware of where you're at. If you tend to be too much of a nerd, then really pay attention to the stuff I'm talking about with Jordan. If you're Jordan and you're watching this, and I'm saying all the stuff that you do well, when I nitpick some of the stuff, pay attention to that. Maybe nerd just a teeny bit more. Basically, you should constantly kind of have that balance, as long as this all ties in with, again, the chase of being optimal should also just have this idea of having a growth mindset. Successful people anywhere in life always know that they can be better. They don't let it bog them down and get all grumpy and sad about, I suck at everything. No, they just realize, is there a better way I could be doing things with training, with nutrition, with business, with relationships, with everywhere in life? That's not a bad thing. But I kind of say, depending on the type of person, you want all of these things first, and then this kind of stuff comes after that. In reality, they can all kind of all go together. This really isn't a curriculum or a class. If you're following this verbatim and you want to nitpick the order, you're listening to the wrong guy. But the reality is, Growth mindset is great as long as it doesn't take away from the other things. Like I said, there was never a point in time, first I did a whole bunch of dumb stuff. And then when I started to think about, okay, I've been doing this dumb stuff for 2 years and this body part hasn't grown, maybe I should seek a little bit of a better way. Or I've been doing this thing I feel like I have to do, but now this joint is wrecked. Maybe I should see if there's a better way. None of that ever took away from any of that. I still enjoyed what I was doing. I still kept going to the gym. I didn't ask for permission first. So again, this notion that a growth mindset is somehow at odds with these really isn't. You just want to kind of make sure things are kind of in the right sequence. So if you look at Jordan, he acts, he loves what he does, he's aware of all the good and bad, he's very aware of what works because of how massive he is, how massive he's helped hundreds and thousands of people get, and also he has a growth mindset. So like I said, there's times and reasons he was chatting with me, despite being bigger and definitely way more British than I am, he was still chatting with me about how could I maybe do this better, this exercise better, these things more efficient, the same stuff, especially as, like I said, similar things would kind of rise up. This hurts, that hurts, how can I work around this, all that kind of stuff. All of those things were literally because he has a growth mindset, and it never took away from this. He just going to the gym, crack on every single day. See, I'm British is rubbing off of me, crack on. We don't actually say that over here in America, but they say that over there, gonna crack on. But he kept doing all that stuff. Any conversation with me, it didn't matter if we nerded for 2 hours about super random stuff, it didn't change his workout the next day for a negative way. It might just mean different angle, different foot position, different exercise even. So mindset, I think the whole industry could use a little bit more of this. Like I said, that pendulum kind of goes and swings back. One day I feel like 10 years ago it was still a little bit meathead heavy, and thinking was just completely frowned upon, like you're an idiot. And now we're a little bit nerd heavy. So let's all kind of get that back to the middle and get some results in there. So nuts and bolts, this is the most basic stuff. And even some of the nerds have just made this stuff complicated. Get stronger. Jordan can probably tell you he's got logbooks. I just picked a bunch of random pictures from Jordan. These are the best I could find on the internet. Jordan's probably like, why the hell did you pick this picture, idiot? Because these are the only ones I could find, man. Google, I searched them. Cut them out with a little app. Boom, now you're there. But get stronger. Same thing that, again, outside of all of this stuff, I'm sure Jordan has movements that he could look at from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, a year ago, where the whole goal really is to get stronger. Now, yes, of course, when I say stronger, I'm not talking 1 rep max, although I'm sure that was important to Jordan at some point in time, but he's never lost track of, if you want to get big, find the movements that work well for you, and you have to get stronger. There's no way around them. Now, form is still an important component and a very real component, in my opinion, of progressive overload, but form doesn't progress, relatively speaking, endlessly. There's like smaller margins of opportunity for there, where again, if you're someone starting out in the gym and only you can do, 20-pound dumbbell press, you've got this massive margin. Like how much your form can, or how much your load can improve, how much stronger you can get, is way bigger than, oh, can I make them a little bit slower, a little bit more squeezy? Now tomorrow's gonna be even squeezier. The next day after that's gonna be the squeeziest. You can only progress squeeziness so far. So the basics, if you don't have stuff written down, how do you know if you're getting stronger? Don't try and remember it, I have a ballpark, whatever it is. If you don't focus on getting stronger within the best muscle building, bodybuilding movements for you, everything else is relatively irrelevant, in my opinion. So standardize form, sure, let form improve along the way, but get stronger and significantly stronger. And if you're not tracking things, the point is people get frustrated when this gets harder. All normal people will get to a point of diminishing returns. And Jordan still does this at this point in time, despite at some point in time, I'm sure when he started lifting, it was just, one day was a 45, next week was another 45, the next week after that was a 45. Jordan now, he puts biscuits on them. That's what they call it, again in the UK, biscuits. Those little plates, the same thing I'm a big fan of, putting a little like kilo plate on, a half kilo, a quarter kilo plate, whatever, in pounds. I don't even know what that translates to. No one can do the math. But basically realizing that despite the fact that that moves to a point of diminishing returns, still the focus should always be to get stronger. If you want to get bigger, this is something the nerds have ruined as well too. Sorry, I'm picking on the nerds a little bit. But I mean, that's kind of, I'm talking about Jordan, so we're gonna pick on nerds. But increase your body weight. There's this notion that can you put on muscle while maintaining body weight? Absolutely. I mean, that's fairly, I hate to use the word, but I won't say proven, but there's overwhelming evidence that absolutely you can put on muscle while not increasing body weight. That's called recomping. But for most normal people, if your goal is to main gain or whatever the term is now, it's idiotic in my opinion. If you're like me, when I started and I was, who knows what I was, 120 pounds, and I was looking at pictures of guys like Jordan or looking at pictures like Jay Cutler, someone that literally weighs 150 pounds more than me, you need to eat in a surplus. Now again, you don't have to get morbidly obese and eating a 3,000 calorie surplus a day, but you should be in a surplus. And the whole point is, even if we want to science and say, well, there's no point to get excessively fat, which I agree on, a lot of people are trying to be in these very fine margins of surplus. From personal experience, training people that are hard gainers who are watching this, you don't want to be at this very fine margin, even if it's technically possible, if you're at 100 calorie surplus a day to grow because you only need so many grams to actually put on tissue, whatever is possible. The problem is with those fine margins, you actually end up under eating. You know, the metabolism tends to be fast, your activity tends to be high. Again, for the nervous guy that has a hard time putting on weight, you want a realistically decent sized margin where you know for sure you're in a surplus, because there's no way to go from 120 pounds to 250 pounds or even 200 pounds without being in a surplus. So get stronger, increase your body weight. Those should be the basics of guys trying to put on muscle and get bigger. Again, as you get more advanced, you know, the whole difference of you could go a whole year and maybe significantly recomp over the course of a year, losing 5 pounds of body fat, putting on 5 pounds of muscle might be a great goal for someone relatively advanced that's not trying to, they just want to look a little bit better. They don't necessarily want to go from, again, like I said, 120 to 250. But most of the people, you got to realize, if we're putting out content, people are searching content. Someone might be watching this just because they like hearing me ramble about muscles and stuff and for the sheer nerddom of it. But most people searching YouTube and social media endlessly want to be huge. They don't want to be a little bit bigger. I don't know why my voice went higher, but that's the sound when you just want to be a little bit bigger. Anyway, some of the other stuff that Jordan does very well. I'm not going to get into this too much because those are the basics that everyone watching this should focus on first and foremost. And then Jordan has great content. Maybe I'll try and link it out here if Trevor can. Trevor, make a note. We're going to link one of Jordan's videos up here where he talks a whole lot about the balance of volume, frequency, and intensity. And again, for most people, thinking, even if you're a very, very beginner, just get stronger, just increase your body weight. As far as the balance of what your split is, the frequency, the volume, you know, the intensity, yeah, all that's important, but just make sure you got this first. And then Jordan does a great way of explaining how all of that, especially as you get more advanced, becomes more and more important. You know, in the beginning, you just don't want to do something completely off the rails and extreme one way or the other, you know, super high volume, super low volume, or whatever it is. But again, as you get more and more advanced, Jordan has some really, really good stuff, because Jordan's like one of those guys where he's been at his genetic limits for like 10 years. So that stuff and that balance comes so much more important when you're just scraping and clawing for every last couple ounces that you can get. And then we'll talk a little bit about, too, it's like, Jordan, if you look through a bunch of his stuff and you look at why he does the exercise that he does, this is the great part, is at some point in time, maybe not for Jordan, but I'm sure bench pressing, I know for a fact there were some movements he did a lot, bench pressing, barbell back squatting, whatever it is, and there may have been a time where there was an emotional attachment to those. But in reality, once you realize, you know, what we're trying to do from a putting on muscle standpoint, you really look at what are the main things that are important. Number one is longevity. If you can't progress something for a long periods of time because you're orthopedically wrecked, doesn't matter how good the exercise is. And then from there, just having this idea of there's a slightly more effective range of motion. And I've said this 8 billion times, I'll continue to say it. It's not this last tiny 6 inches of what we perceive as lengthened. It's probably just biasing slightly towards the mid to lengthen. And that's why if we look at movements that Jordan's doing, you know, we're talking about presses. We're not talking about him squeezing in the shorten range. We're not also talking about him just squeezing this lengthen range. We're talking about stuff that load from the lengthen through the mid range significantly. And that's what we're going to talk about with upper body presses, lower body presses, squatting, leg pressing. Even when we're talking pulling motions, things are getting through that lengthened and the mid-range and not getting obsessed. Again, the mistake you can make with range of motion is getting stuck in that squeezy zone. And that is where it's like, oh, I feel flies here the best, so I'm going to stay there. I feel curls there the best. Again, between the lengthened and the fully shortened, so if we're picking that last little bit, yeah, the lengthened's probably more important, but realistically from exercise selection, it's probably the mid-range to the lengthened range is the most effective, and there's a couple of exceptions. Moving on, so we're going to talk a little bit now about some of his movements and actually doing movement analysis a little bit. So for push, you know, I didn't go in, I just want to go kind of some of the big stuff that Jordan does, literally big stuff. So we have some sort of overheady, high incliney, pressy type thing. Now the nerd's going to get out the protractor and ignore the bigger part. So they're going to see this video and say, well, are you trying to get some clavicular fibers or the front delt or whatever it is? And they're going to ignore this part. Look at that part. That's 4 plates and a quarter on there for some sort of high pressy type thing. And let's look at the range of motion that he's going through. So we'll go back. Let me pause. Pause game. So we got here at the bottom. Where's the bottom? So not just looking at how low he brings relative to his chin, which is low, but your delt doesn't cross over your, oh, did I mess up my pen? Oh, yeah, there we go. The delt doesn't cross over. Come on, pen. This is his upper arm, kind of down here. Did I get that right? Yeah, there we go, more like that. Jordan very inconveniently put that plate in front of the video here, so next time you film that, Jordan, move those little plates off there. But the whole point is here, lots of bigger movements, which again should be the base of your programming, not really because of anything magical about it. So again, if we were talking more hardcore, he'd be doing a free weight. If he was the most hardcore, he'd be doing the same thing standing. So this is a perfect example of, yes, you should do bigger movements because you want, the bigger movements are going to tend to be the ones where you overload again that mid and lengthened range, like an overhead press will be, but also not being a ding dong and feeling the need to be more manly, because again, if we just think of a picture of the most manly thing, people talk about standing overhead press or even seated overhead free barbell press. The reality is this whole balance of, like, again, not everything has to be completely free weight or completely locked in, but in general, which I mostly agree with, the more stable something is, the better the output is. So biggest thing we're looking at here more than anything else, which I made some notes here, we'll talk a little bit about arm path, but the most important thing is the obvious stuff. Look at the range of motion that he's choosing. Every single thing I'm going to point at, he works significantly well through the mid to lengthened range and just gets ridiculously, brutally strong here, where you can sit here and analyze, is this more for front delts, more for clavicular fibers, more for sternal fibers, and whatever it is. The whole point that you're missing is if you guys at home can comfortably go to this range of motion, which 95% of human beings can, and you can go through there with control and you can load it and you progress to 4 plates in a corner, your pressy stuff is going to be big. So we look through all of his movements while I erase some stuff on here. Again, Jordan, move those next time. Here's another overhead pressy thing. Look at the range of motion on this one. So look, he goes from here, so super duper tucked, to where overhead, he's covering a huge range of motion again. So what is this? This is another overhead pressy. Again, we could analyze his angle and say, what is he talking about? Mainly some front delts, some triceps for sure, it's clavicular fibers, whatever. But he's going through maybe 110 degrees range of motion, and he's really loading, really lengthened through the mid-range and staying just shortened. So it's like, this is the stuff where, again, everyone wants to overanalyze stuff, and I'm not saying there's not a place for flies, I'm not saying there's not a place for whatever, but in reality, for your pressy stuff, pick a overhead pressy thing, pick a flat pressy thing. So we got another flat pressy thing here, and look how low he's coming again, looking at his upper arm, super duper tucked. Can't really get the good angle here because he's thick, but his upper arm tucking down there somewhere at that point, tucked down in at his side. And again, this is one of those things, what is he getting? Some front delt, some clavicular fibers, some of the lower fibers because he's stretching past his body. And what is he even loading? We have this option, what's the load pattern here? So if you're not familiar with Prime, he's overloading, most of the load is in the lengthened through the mid-range. And again, on those machines, if we want to be a little bit of a nerdy here, that's kind of splitting hairs, but that's generally how you do it. Maybe even sometimes a little bit more at the top. But again, we're looking to get huge. You're doing pressing motions. What is the range of motion to have? The mid to lengthened range. And then we'll pick on Jordan a teeny bit because I can't be completely nice the entire time. So again, what was the loading pattern on this machine, how that lever arm works and where it is relative essentially to gravity. He is going, again, lengthened to mid-range. If I was gonna pick on Jordan, because Jordan gave me permission to actually say to learn some stuff here, is looking a little bit how much his sternum is moving here. So if I was saying, Jordan's like, hey Joe, I weigh 8 million pounds. I want to weigh 8,000,001 pounds. At the bottom, let's see where his sternum angle is here. Sternum angle is there. As he's coming to the top, where is his sternum angle? Sternum angle is here. So there's some fairly significant motion from the range of motion. Now again, if I was actually, Jordan asked me, which he didn't, but he gave me permission to pick on him a little bit, that would be some of the nitpicky stuff. We'll talk a little bit towards the end of this about really trying to have balance of those things. And all this comes from things that I don't understand. There's been times when I've been moderately strong, but the level of how much weight this is and how much weight Jordan presses on various machines is absurd because the size of Jordan is absurd. So the tolerance of having this perception of what working hard feels like, what having load on the body feels like. So if we're gonna err on one side or the other here, Jordan tends to, I think, err on the hard working side because I would say all other things considered, that's the more important side to err on. But if I was saying, Jordan, if you wanna kind of balance those things out a teeny bit, I would, if I were you, start to sometimes favor a little bit more on the for me side type thing. Because again, the whole point of this is all these fibers attach to the sternum and cross over the shoulder joint. So as he comes down to the bottom and he lets his ribs drop a little bit, he's actually not getting as much length as he could. So again, if you imagine these crossing over here, crossing over my shoulder joint, see if I can clear these off here. So if these attach from here to here, if his ribs, so he's got it right here, If his ribs were higher and those same muscles came along for the ride from there to there, you should see that second thing I just drew is longer. So again, if you're kind of caved in a little bit, you're gonna get so much length, and if your chest is up and extended and your upper arm stays in the same position, you're actually gonna get a little bit more length there. So the goal in the perfect world is not having the ribs move at all. Your shoulder blades can move a little bit when you're pressing, but again, in the perfect world is keeping those ribs in a fixed position the whole time, because either way, you're gonna lose something a little bit. So as you're coming up and getting to that shortened position, you cave, you're gonna miss a little bit. And as you're trying to come in that stretch position and you cave, you're gonna miss a little bit of length as well. So there you go, Jordan. There's a little form tip. Let's make sure we clean that up for next time that you're pressing 8 billion pounds. And then same thing, come and do a dip. We'll watch Jordan dip. He weighs 8 million pounds and has 8 million pounds added to his waist. And where does he go? So pretty darn good. If I was going to draw some lines of force, which the peak here is through the hand, well, actually, it's certainly not that angle, gravity, and we look where his upper arm is, he's taking it pretty much right to the point of peak joint torque, and I'm guessing Jordan has so much tissue, or maybe a little bit of some shouldery stuff. Some nerd will say you can go a little bit deeper. Well, when you got little sticks for arms and you don't have something the size of a pumpkin around your shoulder joint, you can generally get a little bit deeper. But even though Jordan might have some stuff going on, that's still pretty darn deep, right about to the point of peak joint torque that he can get from that given load. So again, not having any super duper mystery to this, not making it overly complicated. If you do your pressing motions where you, one, figure out where you have peak joint torque, you go there, you own there, as long as you can comfortably go there, and then you progress those loads over time, all of your pressing stuff is gonna be giant. And then from there, you'll see Jordan just does some different arm passes. I've never had a conversation about that. But again, on the overhead pressy thing, sometimes he's a little bit out, sometimes a little bit in. Chest press I've seen, sometimes a little bit tucked, sometimes a little bit here. Find the arm path that works best for you. And again, really working through those mid and lengthen ranges, all of these can work. You know, as you're coming more across the body, a little bit more of a high elbow position I think is beneficial. But again, especially for most of this length in the mid range, tucked to high elbow is fine. Just go with shoulder joint comfort. Moving on to pull stuff. It's my favorite thing to watch Jordan do, pulling heavy stuff off the ground. So first and foremost, find a deadlift variation that does this. Spine pretty much parallel to the ground. You know, if we basically have the line of force from the bar and we have essentially the moment arm here, which is gonna be the distance from that line of force to the train joint, is essentially very close to 90 degrees. Then we're basically maximizing joint torque for everything from that line of force, from the load that he's using. And that's the whole point if you ever hear somebody talk about doing, it doesn't matter how much knee bend or how much whatever, just get your spine parallel to the ground, which tends to be less knee bend, which tends to be more like an RDLE type thing. That's gonna be the one that creates the most joint torque at the hips and at all the spine and erector along the way for a given load. And so if you do something like this, you bend over with that much load, maintain a beautiful spine angle like Jordan does, and you get up to this type of weight, you're gonna look like a gorilla, because that's what Jordan looks like, just some sort of giant gorilla when he's lifting the weights. And then for anybody that doesn't know any better too, having seen Jordan in person, the first time we trained, in between sets, I accidentally set my car keys down on his back and I lost them inside of his traps. So someone will say, looking at this, the reason for that hilarious dad joke, is it looks like there's a teeny bit of rounding there. I promise you there is not. He has so much erector meat that you really can't see at all where his spine is. I'm not kidding, he probably has like 3 or 4 inches of meat before you would actually get down and be able to poke his spine. So if you ever watch as he goes through, this stays very fixed. It looks slightly rounded, his spine is completely neutral, and as he goes through his deadlifts, there's not a ton, if at all, any flexion extension. And Jordan will tell you he's been deadlifting for a minute and is pretty darn good at keeping that locked in and unchanging. So just from the sheer standpoint of how do I get a ginormous, huge back, prioritizing, again, if you're looking at thickness, erector stuff, find a variation, run it into the ground, and kind of prioritize rows to a certain degree as well too. If we're looking at overall back development, if you do some proper rowing, not only will you get a significant amount of lat involvement, most importantly, you'll get all this stuff up here too. So you get all this back meat, and what I wanted to point at, I gotta start over for Jordan's back meat, is as he goes through this range of motion through his stretches, you can see significantly, I mean, it kind of almost looks like his back is flat here. And the goal is to keep that spine still and everything moving around that spine. You know, his shoulder blade is somewhere over here. So it's as protracted as you can get. And then as he comes to the top, well, we're gonna get it any minute now. And as he comes to the top, you can see how much meat we've got bunched up. His shoulder blade is now pulled somewhere along here. It's changing shapes I was starting to draw a triangle and somehow it turned into a square. It morphed. It grew from a triangle shape, which is the shape your scapula actually is, to some sort of square. But it's moved a significant range of motion. And as you're rowing, if you want your thickness stuff, everything that moves your shoulder blades to get bigger, that's really what you want. Significant range of motion of the shoulder blade. And then the upper arms just come along for the ride. So he's got this path. If you really go through a lot of his rowing stuff, you'll see sometimes tucked, sometimes a little bit wider. Most rowing stuff, I feel like, again, it's worth having 2 rowing variations, something a teeny bit more tucked, something a little bit more out. But I think if I recall, Jordan, maybe his caption on this or whatever, this is a little bit more lat focused for him. But as you can see, as long as your shoulder blades are moving opposing that load, you're gonna get tons of thickness stuff as well too. And from there, chest support. So in front here, I'm not saying there isn't a time to potentially do a bent over row, but bent over rows tend to do 2 jobs not as well as they could be done if those jobs were done separately. And all I mean by that is when Jordan uses a chest support here, we can now make sure that the upper back is getting maximal tax without any distraction or potential fatigue from holding an isometric with the erectors and the hips, and vice versa. If he's not having to focus on what he can row and hang on to with a rowing weight and all that kind of stuff, he can strap in tight and he can do his deadlift variation and make sure that his erectors and hips get maximal stimulus. So, you know, bent over rowing stuff without a chest support can have a place, but for the most part, especially as you get larger, I think you're better off having some really good chest supported row and some deadlift variation. And so I said here from there, you know, arm path, you know, I think it's worth at some point in time 2 different ones. And of course, pull downs are fine as well too. And so again, if I had kind of a complete back program, just a bare bones complete back program, row like this, deadlift like Jordan, and pull down. And you're gonna cover all of your lat stuff, your thickness stuff, erector stuff, and everything that's in between. And then again, there's no reason most people over the course of their split, if you like a little variety, a little bit of range of motion, slightly different stimulus, I don't think there's anything wrong with a pull down like this and a pull down like this. Like I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with a row like this and a row like this and a deadlift variation, maybe a little back extension. So again, if your back workout ends up looking like 5 or 6 movements, whether you like that all in one or split apart, I think that's fine as well too. But from a bare bones, do the stuff Jordan does and do it well and don't overthink the other stuff. All right, and then lastly, what we'll get into is some leg stuff. And so really the thing you wanna make sure you're happening here is, again, most people, there's nuance. And again, if you want some more nerd stuff, the whole point is go watch some more of my things. But some of the things that I hammer on as well too is maximize the range of motion that you have available. And so if we're looking here, the 2 ranges of motion we're gonna talk about is knee stuff. I might even not got complete in the bottom there, but you guys have heard me talk about this angle. As for what someone has available, Jordan's got a little bit more available than some guys because he does not like hypertrophying his calves, as you can see. Zing, take that, Jordan. But reality is full knee flexion is gonna be when your hamstring smashes into your calf. So whatever you've got, get to that range of motion. The same thing, Jordan's doing a hack with 12,000 plates. He has pretty darn good control, and I'm sure he's progressed to that over time. So quads, pick some sort of squat variation. This is also the thing, again, balance what Jordan does. He's doing a hack squat. He doesn't have to be super manly and put a bar on his back. At some point in time, he could do 1 billion pounds with a bar on his back, but realize, hey, this is really taxing on everything between that bar and my legs. I want stuff to just be more taxing for my legs. So not married to a motion and just getting in these joint positions and loading the crap out of them. And then from there, we'll talk about the rest of legs. And again, there's some more stuff. Jordan does thrusts, he does abductors, he does hamstrings. I mean, that stuff's kind of more boring if we're really trying to be ginormous. This is the stuff that you really want to be good at first and foremost. So what are we talking about for maximizing range of motion here? So not so much on leg press, although this is a lot of quad stimulus as well here too, but hopefully you can see the difference in the knee angle there. So way less range of motion as he's coming to the top. It's more from mid to shortness, not very low to the shortness. But what do we have here? We have a pelvis that is shaped somewhat like this, and we have it going up somewhat like this. So if we look at, let's call this a fully extended, so this would be if his hip was fully extended with a leg attached to it. This is a significant amount of range of motion his hips are going through. So leg press done like this is for sure some quads to the mid-range, but a lot of glutes to the mid and lengthened range as well too. And the reality is if you get like Jordan is here, and you can take that as deep as you possibly can go, considering he's got a lot of tissue everywhere, and progress loads over time. Although this guy, I think this guy right here, sorry, Jordan deserves part of the PR on that. Just make sure you write his name in your logbook in conjunction with those 80,000 plates. Let's be honest, Jordan, once you get to this many plates, nobody can even count that high, especially not a meathead. You just wrote a lot down there. Plus John. Thanks, John. Thanks for the help. Zing. But anyway, so legs, for the most part, similar stuff. Now again, we can get into some hamstring, some adductor stuff as well too, but all jokes aside, you get to the type of form, the type of range of motion, the type of ownership that Jordan has for his pressing movements, and you progress those over time, you're gonna have some parts of your legs ginormous for sure. And then lastly, as we're finishing up, making fun of Jordan, here's another picture of him, because this is what bodybuilders do. Completely normal. Don't do this in the grocery store. You don't just go into the mirror and smile and pull your legs up basically to your underwear. But in the gym, completely normal behavior, and I understand. But this is the stuff, so someone from the outside would be like, oh, Joe, how do you like so much of Jordan's stuff? Or like, I think that's why I'm doing this. I asked on Instagram who people wanted me to see, who you guys wanted to see me review the most. Jordan was the top by far. He was above like Bumstead, Phil Heath, a whole bunch of other guys that I haven't gotten to yet, which I think some people feel that we might be at odds with stuff, and we are not. We're in general, like I said, there's both of us trying to balance the nerd and the meathead. He's definitely a little bit more on the meathead side. I'm definitely a little bit more on the nerd side. But when we have conversations, you know, 95% is probably going to be agreeing. The other 5% is like I was just doing, giving Jordan a little shit, and he's going to give me some shit as well too, just for the stuff that's really there can be some coaching preference. We obviously have different experiences. We work with different demographics. We do have some things we offer to the table, but most good trainers or coaches just chalk that up literally to coaching preference. I mean, at the end of the day, I've literally never trained someone where I was like, oh, I can't figure out how to put muscle on this person. Honestly, one of the things that Jordan says all the time is putting on muscle is easy. I shouldn't say putting on muscle is simple. And I would agree, putting on muscle is simple. If you focus on those big things, the things that get more complicated are putting on muscle when you've been doing this for 15 years and you're that side. The other things that are a bit more complicated is getting ginormous while keeping your joints intact. And those are the things we can nitpick. But a lot of it is we're more on the same page than other things. And so Jordan says all the time as well too, this is what I do. And so again, if you just kind of skim through some of his stuff and you'll say, why is he doing this exercise? Why isn't he doing that exercise? And we do the thing that the internet does is, well, if he's doing something, he must be excluding something else. If he does this exercise, he's clearly implying every other exercise is inferior, stupid, and you're an idiot if you ever do it. And in reality, if you ever read the captions, which nobody makes it that far, let's be honest, we're not a lot of scholars around here, is he says, this is what I do, and then explains it, and then can give you some concepts as well too. Oh, well, why do I do this range of motion? Why am I not doing squats as much? Well, my knees hurt there, so I'm finding where can I load and train things without pain. Aside from the nuts and bolts, when I said and went through the whole nuts and bolts stuff, that's the stuff that Jordan still does. That's the stuff that you should fixate on doing, you know, kind of exactly like Jordan. Get stronger, put on body weight, you know, make sure that you're thinking and all that good stuff. But aside as the whole exact thing, when you read what Jordan does, if you actually want to get better, you'll find that subtlety where there is some nuance in there. Well, why this exercise over that exercise? Why this range of motion? Why this little difference in volume? Why this split? That stuff is cool once you've done stuff that's all on the earlier slides. And then again, realize when you're learning from someone like Jordan or learning from someone else that's actually doing things at a high level, has actually taken their physique far, has actually helped a lot of other people do the same, then of course this is some stuff where you can say, oh, if he's doing something specific, maybe I'll read it and I'll learn some cool high-level stuff. But realize the whole point is you don't have to do almost anything exactly like Jordan when it comes to the specifics, you know, of some of the exercise selection, some of the more specifics and nuanced stuff with volume and all that kind of stuff. So don't be attached to movements. And this is kind of a balance too, where I say you're not Jordan. So one, you don't have to do things exactly like him. And also you don't have to do all the movements that Jordan does. So there's times where we'll say, I love this movement, like he's obsessed with deadlifting or obsessed with whatever it is. And there'll be times where he's like, oh, I'm doing this in spite of that. So that's that whole thing where there's some self-awareness. Like Jordan, he's always said his goal has never been to be the best on-stage bodybuilder ever. There's times if you actually read through all of his stuff and listen to what he says, where he talks about how much he loves, one, just trying to be absolutely ginormous, and how much he loves lifting really, really heavy stuff, like competing in lifts that nobody cares about. Like he's got the world record leg press or hip thrust or whatever it is. He's writing that half as a joke because that'll never be a competition, but also writing that because for him, competing with himself, that is very important. And so again, realize that that part is important, you know, knowing why you're doing the movements that you're doing, trying to take them as far as you're capable of taking them, but also realizing if you do want to do some fun stuff, be fine with it, but just be aware of the trade-offs. There's been times the same when I've done movements that aren't perfect or optimal or ideal for hypertrophy, but I like doing them, that's fine as well too. So same thing, if you see Jordan doing something, there's almost nothing, even if the whole thing is about, hey, this is the thing you should do, you're an idiot if you don't. If you actually had a conversation in person with them and said, well, hey man, I really kind of prefer this one and blah, blah, and you're doing all the stuff you're supposed to do, training really hard, doing it consistently, progressively, he'd be like, oh yeah, of course, you don't have to do that thing. That's just me just kind of giving everybody shit. So be aware of that kind of stuff. This is the thing again of not being Jordan. So some of the stuff where I say, don't get hyper fixated on some things they say or takes things out of context. If you read, Jordan is a big fan, if that's the right word, more of a big advocate for people doing, especially people starting full body. As you get a little bit larger, doing a half body, maybe sometimes push, pull, lower, he might say, but even for most people not. The whole point with all that stuff as well too is understand the concepts. For most people, having higher frequency, being able to repeat the process more often is obviously a better thing. There's a reason most people at home probably aren't training every body part once every 3 weeks, because you have this idea of, oh, well, once every week at least works better. And if you really think about it, we're like, well, if once every week works better, what about once every 5 days? What about once every 3 days? So the idea of more frequency, if you can recover from it, is obviously a good thing. Some things that Jordan says, if you do full body, if you do half body, even if you do push, pull, lower, sometimes that will result in, if you're people like me, not having the most balanced physique in the universe. Meaning if you're always training arms last, if you're always training calves last, remember I cut them off right here to Jordan just to do him a favor. If you're always training those last, they might not be proportionally as large as some of the other stuff. And when I started, I'm more prone to looking like a refrigerator. The first time I had someone that actually knew what they were talking about, analyzing my physique, they were like, literally, what the hell do you do for like glutes and erectors? Because I was so fixated on having to do deadlifts and doing barbell back squats, which are movements I actually love doing, but my ass was ginormous. I was just thick as hell, and my chest was actually pretty big, but everything else, I just didn't have any extremities. My delts sucked, my arms sucked, calves were okay, hamstrings sucked. And so that was at that point in time, is like, oh, I probably should have been prioritizing those types of things. So all I'm being said is don't get too fixated on when do you have to prioritize things a little bit. The concept's great. If you're brand new and you have no muscle, you need to prioritize everything. Everything sucks. So that's the reason of start with a full body or do a half body or whatever it is. So you're just training things and prioritizing those bigger things. Again, the whole point of that, which makes sense, is if you're trying to go from 120 pounds to 250 pounds, is, a curl going to get you there faster, or is a heavy row and heavy press going to get there faster, right? So prioritizing the movements that will be most responsible for the most pounds of tissue. And if your goal is always to be the most ginormous you can be and you don't care about that balance thing, you can always program that way. But at some point in time, if your calves are lacking, your delts are lacking, your arms are lacking, you can prioritize those. You can have those as your own day. I give you permission, that's still fine. Or you can just get kind of smart with your programming as well too. You could do a full body or half body, and you could start with arms on a lower body day or delts on a pull day, whatever it might be. And so again, I'm not even saying that lends itself to having to not do a push pull or not doing a full body or a half body, but you can, program that. But it's also just fine to have those days still as well too. Again, some of the stuff taken out of context. Everyone's so obsessed with frequency right now for pretty good reason. You can still have an arm day. It's fine, I promise. If your arms really suck, prioritizing them, training them first, training them fresh, and having your own day is not a bad thing. What's the last one I have here? Oh yeah, and this is the one thing I said. So again, if I was talking with Jordan, if we were training in person, like one, there's gonna be little teeny tiny things I can honestly nitpick. And when I say nitpick, anytime I've worked with people that do a ton of stuff well, and if you look at the people that I work with just from normally on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, I'm blessed to get to work with a lot of very high level people that really do a ton of stuff well. The way I always present information would never in a million years be like, hey, that's wrong, this is right, or that's for sure the worst way to do this is better. If he was doing a chest press on the warm-ups, I'd say, hey, really focus on this. And then if we're going through your top set, really focus on maintain, see if that feels. Or does that fixation on that little form thing take away from your output too much? And so with actual strong people, I literally had this exact same conversation last time I trained Bumstead, who is actually ridiculously strong, trains very well. I say, man, think about where you're at in your career, and especially someone at a high level. You're actually strong. So the difference is, so the nerd will say, oh, instead of, pressing the 100-pound dumbbells, I'm gonna go back to the 40s and really tighten the form up. That's not the way it should work. The thing would be someone like Bumstead that's pressing 150s, and I say, hey man, based on all the warm-ups and everything we did, maybe we stick with the 145s or the 140. And if we focus a little bit more on this form thing, a little bit more on this control thing, one, you can maybe have the exact same stimulus or potentially slightly better stimulus, and you're also gonna reduce the risk for injury. That's a really good trade-off at this time. So again, if I was, Jordan is for sure someone who, because he's legitimately actually strong, not fake strong, again, that's the whole reason some people's form is so ridiculous because they're just trying to be fake strong. Jordan is actually strong, like legit crazy strong. Most of the stuff, if I went through the gym with him, might be one of these things where it's like, hey, it's not like saying this like 2-step forward, 1-step back thing. It's like a, quarter of a step forward and then taking 10 steps forward. Is that a good analogy? I don't know. But the whole thing would be literally as we're going through his warm-up sets and all that kind of stuff, it might result in his top set being 5% less than maybe it would have been, or 10% less maybe, and kind of always having that little back and forth over time. I would say, hey man, really utilize your warm-up sets. Always have this idea of Could I be making this movement harder on myself? At the end of the day, that's really the difference between a bodybuilder and a weightlifter, and not just being a weightlifter in a higher rep range. There still is this concept of how do I make this as hard as possible on myself, and kind of having a balance of those things. And there's a whole bunch of ways to go about it, where it could be like, hey, every once in a while, every single time you're in the gym, I think is the best way to do it. Really, analyze the movements, doing your warm-ups so you're not wasting time, you're not doing whatever, and always thinking, how could I make this harder? So again, most people at home, if you're the nerd, if you've never put on any real weight, that's probably not you. But if you're the smaller percentage of someone that's actually made a ton of progress, you're already brutally strong, that would be the thing between that whole balance of the sides of, or more the form side or more of the load and effort side. Jordan, I think, would probably always benefit from just constantly checking himself, hey, am I letting my thing that I like the most, lifting heavy stuff, kind of get away from me here, and maybe focus a little bit more on this form thing. But at the end of the day, then, I know for a fact Jordan's, that's stuff that he's very aware of as well too, where it's always balancing like, hey, yeah, sometimes I'm trying this, but today I just felt like, cussing, yelling at Corinne in my quiet gym while trying to lift some crazy weight and have a lot of fun. So again, that goes back to that self-awareness and all that good stuff as well too. So that is it. Jordan, if you guys are skinny, Jordan is the guy that you want to go check out some stuff. So I'm going to promo all of his stuff. I think I'll still have my promo at the end here and get my app too. But I'm going to say, go check out all this stuff. Because honestly, if you're looking to put on some more muscle, you want someone that actually has solid, great advice. I agree with 99% of it. Not that that matters. Jordan is the man. Follow him on YouTube. Follow him on Instagram. Go to his website. Buy some of his supplements. He'll be the first to tell you supplements aren't that important. Spend your money on other stuff first. And then secondarily, get some of his supplements as well. And he's a great guy that you guys can learn a lot from. And again, make fun of him for some other random stuff as well too. But until the next time, guys, hope you guys enjoyed this. After watching my content, have you ever thought to yourself, man, I like how Joe went to school for this, has more formal education than 99% of other coaches, with over 20 years and 20,000 hours experience training clients in person, how he's managed training departments for several companies and helped develop literally thousands of trainers, as well as the fact that he's won 2 overall bodybuilding titles, competed at the national level, and has trained everyone from clients in their 90s all the way up to Mr. and Miss Olympia. And then you're all like, dang, I wish I had Joe's brain. And not in a creepy way, like in a jar on your mantle, but maybe just in your pocket to reference, maybe occasionally gently stroke and pet, and to help guide your gains when in the gym. Well, my friend, you are in luck. My app is essentially just that, my hypertrophy brain right in your pocket at your fingertips, packed with over 25 full programs tailored to every level and goal, the ability to create your own programs, logbook and track your progress, and a diet builder that generates and adjusts custom macros, as well as allows you to track your food and meals. It also has hundreds of hours of educational content and one-on-one support in the forums where you can get custom audio replies from myself and my coaches, and literally so much more. Best of all, you can try all it has to offer risk-free for 7 days. Click the link in the description down below and let the brain and physique gains begin.